Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the latest in our series of webcasts. We're talking today about horror stories of digital transformation, but not for the fun of it, but to work out what we can learn. I'm the guy on the left. I'm Dan French. Pleased to see you all again. I'm very pleased to be joined by Steve Fox, who was Vice President of Global Business Services for Thermo Fisher Scientific and now leads our process excellence practice at Consider Solutions. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be here. Appreciate the time.
So looking forward to getting your perspectives on these. You've been through a lot of this stuff yourself, so looking forward to talking it through. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the promise of transformation. We're going to get into these three very specific case studies to try and protect the innocent, and then we're going to get Steve's input about how do we end up in these swamps and what do we do about it, and some thoughts for the road, some tactics and strategies, and then some Q&A. And as we go through this, I'm sure questions will come up and thoughts will come up as we go through. Please enter those questions as they come into your head through the little question panel on your GoToWebinar interface, and we'll try and deal with them at the end. We're going to pump through this pretty quickly. It's a 30-minute session. Want to be respectful of your time, but I think there's some really important insights here. The key point here is disappointment is the difference between expectation and reality. So what we're trying to do is bring those two things closer together by looking at some of the realities, work out what can we do about it. So the promised land of transformation, we have a business challenge or a business opportunity we're trying to break through by changing our operating model, changing the way our processes work. And we know it requires a lot of collective effort, people, process, technology, and all the rest of it. And the hope is at some point we relax and chill out on a beach in the sunset and say, job well done. Now, of course, we know that doesn't happen very often. And more often than not, there's some horror stories. And we all know those surveys, research that says between 70 and 90% of digital transformations fail. And that's not to say they fail kind of absolutely abysmally. What it means is that a very large percentage fail to deliver on the business case. Perhaps the scale of the business, the scale of the benefit in the business case, certainly the time scale of achieving the benefit. And they're very rarely abject failures, but definitely too many examples, a majority of examples where we don't get what we expect, and we've got to find a way of addressing that. And that's what this is about today. So pull up a chair by our generative AI fireplace and let's listen to some stories here about what's going on elsewhere. And you might recognize some of these ideas. So I'm just going to talk through three of these case studies. We have changed the names, locations, and vendors involved to protect the innocent. Little generated innocent person there. So Company Alpha, this is a cloud ERP enabled transformation. There's a lot of this going on at the moment. So you've got business, poor consistency in this particular company, poor consistency and integration of processes, practices, policies, and operations across the world. So they wanted to harmonize that, simplify it, and streamline it, and also had a challenge with their current ERP kind of coming into end of life. So they had to do something technically as well. So the obvious example was let's re-engineer these processes on a new ERP. Wonderful, great plan, can't argue with that. The challenge is the outcome was with the new ERP, with the same processes, same end-to-end, some new user experience, but even that wasn't great news because the user experience wasn't always right for the right users. So a really nice sort of, a very nice graphical interface isn't always great if you're a kind of a high volume person. So that was kind of somewhat worrying. And the statement made was, well, the new problems are still the old problems. The CFO saying, so what's next? When are we going to get the value? And when looking at the post-mortem into all this, the discussion really came down to the statement that we believed we were transforming the processes, but we were talking across purposes. So there were lots of participants involved. There was the IT organization of Company Alpha. There was their business sponsors and process owners. There was the technology vendor for the ERP, and there was the integrator of the ERP. And this is really kind of one of the cognitive biases. We think, and they made it very clear, we talk business process, but everyone was talking a different thing. The integrator was talking about process being a series of actionable steps, a system workflow. And yes, the way, when you take steps through the new ERP, it'll be different to the old ERP. Therefore, it is a re-engineered process. If you take that definition, that kind of makes sense. But from the business point of view, nothing had changed. No real change had happened to the end-to-end cycle. So I won't go into this in detail. You can read that, but it's interesting, and it caused a lot of internal debate with this company about how do we make sure we're talking about the same thing. And I would challenge you, if you talk to your stakeholders and some of your team members and customers and ask them, write down what you mean by a business process. You ask 10 people, you'll get 11 different answers. So there's one of the first things we tend to assume, because the word is so obvious, it's easily defined in a dictionary, but it means different things to different people. So horror story 2, company Delta, again, names, location of vendors changed to protect the innocent. This was a source to pay transformation, so specific single process. And the business problem was very much about maverick spend, poor spend under management, costly, inefficient AP process, which was kind of secondary, really wanted to get spend under management. And the solution was a new, again, a kind of re-engineered process, new P2P suite with integrated purchase requests, purchase ordering, spend management, supplier self-service, and e-invoicing. What, sound like a great plan. The outcome, however, was a new system, but with very low user and supplier adoption, and worse still, AP effort had gone up, hadn't gone down. And the concern was, well, we chose the kind of one of the leading P2P suites, source to pay suites, and we took all the advice of the provider. Where did it go wrong? We said what we were trying to do. And this is another kind of misunderstanding, which is costly, which they thought we were transforming a process, but really every process has got a number of routes through it, depending on categories. If it was the order to cash, it might be segments of the customer base. For source to pay, it's on categories of spend, categories of suppliers. So this is the interesting point here. So even the best end-to-end process has many journeys or routes through it. And it's easy, particularly when you listen sometimes to the kind of the marketing narrative, you say, oh, we're going to sort out source to pay or purchase to pay. But actually, there are noticeably different routes through that. So direct spend, different types of indirect spend. I mean, you can read it. And what they found out is there was only one element of that they're actually working on, because the key stakeholder was focused on their productivity, and they had a particular priority segment. So the business case didn't make sense at the end of the day, and it was somewhat disappointing. Third story, company Omega, to keep up the Greek theme. This was an order to cash transformation, and the challenge here was lengthy DSO, too many disputes and collections challenges. Want to get collected ASAP, and I want to make sure there's no disputes about when collection should happen. And again, they put in place a very good system, integrate with ERP, with credit and collection support. Great news. And then they put it in and did all the right things, but it didn't really move the dial sufficiently on DSO. And they found out it's still very resource intensive to chase customers for debt and disputes. It hasn't really changed it. It couldn't work out why. And then in the post-mortem, they realized the biggest leverage, the biggest pressure point for payment is actually at point of sale. And so one of the things they realized, which didn't actually cost them anything in terms of technology implementation, was to have a conversation to make that sales compensation is paid on collection, not on revenue, which was a bit of a shocker for the sales and marketing leadership, but they bought into it. And of course, at that point, then everybody gets interested in collection. And the additional benefit was they used to have a challenge with payment terms being the easiest number one giveaway in negotiation terms. And that stopped immediately, because when people realized commissions and bonuses were affected on when the money came in, that became the last thing to give away. So very, very interesting. So what does this really mean? It was end-to-end process thinking. And they worked out that they had silo efficiencies, focusing on booking revenue and focus on collections, when really it was the same problem. Misaligned performance measures between commissions and bad debt. You can solve that problem with a stroke. Not easy, but when you get the buy-in, it can be done, and that's suboptimal business outcomes. So 3 examples there, which are very, very painful, but with very clear lessons. So, I've given those through. I mean, Steve, you know all about this, but tell us Why do you think we end up in these swamps, and what should we do about it? Let's talk root causes, Steve.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening. So, first of all, I think as you probably all can attest to, right? Whether all roads lead to Rome or all roads lead to root causes, this becomes an exercise in understanding kind of where we went wrong. And I love. I think it was Einstein that this quote is attributed to, that the only source of true knowledge, right, is experience. And so what I'm going to share with you is kind of some of my experience. Dan obviously shared some good examples around some of the folks we deal with and some of their experiences around things that went a little sideways, we'll say. But kind of the first area here is around the why, right? And do we really understand the why? And, there's some classic mechanisms and techniques out there, right? We talk about 5 whys, whether it's 3 whys or 7 whys. It's just getting to the root cause by continuing to ask the question why. It's the thing that I started to leverage probably a little bit later in my career than I wished I had, to really get to, what are we trying to do here? Why are we trying to solve this problem? Why is this problem the important piece to address now? And again, whether it's the 5 whys, whether it's fishbone, whether it's some other mechanisms, it's really important before we even think about engaging somebody else, even think about spending money or putting together a capital asset request or an ROI analysis, is starting with the why. Why are we trying to solve this issue? Why is it important that this issue or this item gets addressed and resolved? And
That's a great point, Steve, because those 3 examples we talked through, they're all really started with really trying to address a symptom and not addressing the root cause. So those 5 whys would have really helped get into why are we really trying to do this.
Exactly, Dan. And I think the other bit here is, along with the why, right? You've got to look at some other things, like what does good look like for us, right? And as you start to engage people or think about engaging people, right? It's you got to consider, why would anybody else be interested in this? Why? What am I going to do? What do I need to do to garner support and sponsorship and participation, active participation in this? So that kind of talks to the what's in it for me, or the with them. And then there's always going to be an exercise around alignment and understanding where people are coming from, and meeting, whether you can meet them in the middle or meet them, closer to one side of these 2 lighthouses in the bottom left. Really, really important. And that the other thing here is, it's got to be, you got to consider the entire organization, right? This is not just a finite small population of stakeholders, which we'll talk about here in a second, people you need to engage, but you need to consider this in a little bit broader context. And I think Dan talked about it earlier on too, is the whole idea around, what are we really delivering, right? What's the value here? If the focus on what we're trying to get done, or what we're proposing to do at this point, let's say, isn't driving some tangible, real value to the organization, or solving a problem that's going to either drive revenue or improve margins, we got to consider, why are we doing it? It goes back to the why. And also, we'll think, you see here kind of the time frames are important, right? Every day, week, month, quarter that passes and specific value hasn't been delivered, right? The value that ultimately gets delivered is eroded over that time frame. And again, with some of the examples Dan went through, I think it's really important, this whole idea of expectations versus outcome, and especially when we're led down a path. Many of us, I've been led down the path many times and kind of bought into it without asking the right questions, right? As far as, what's going to be the outcome of this? Oh, you're going to have a 60% improvement in efficiency in your P2P or O2C or R2R or hire to retire administrative functions. Well, if that doesn't get delivered, right, that outcome isn't meeting the expectation, and somebody somewhere, if they're paying attention, is going to be disappointed. And the whole idea is to obviously avoid that. So we dive into kind of the root cause. Number 2 is around the who, right? And really understanding who that is. And one thing I learned, again, kind of the hard way here is, a mandate, a sponsorship, an executive, a C-suite sponsorship, that's not enough to really garner the support you need to get something meaningful done, right? I mean, if you think about who we're engaging, how far within the organization we need to go to kind of understand who are our true enabling stakeholders, and really who's benefiting from this, right? Who's the beneficial customer? and kind of understanding what are their motivations and how do we get them engaged. Again, it goes back to that what's in it for me. But also you look at like this top right, this top right stakeholder quadrant here, the high influence, high interest, high influence. Pretty easy to figure out who those people are, I think, for the most part. But then, the hard part's engaging, meaningful engagement. But you focus on that top right, but we can't forget about some of these, especially that top left was one that was always important to me. Is, you're one resignation, one promotion, one anything away from somebody in the top left moving to the top right, and you want to have a relationship with those people, right? And the other thing here is influence. Being able to influence and looking for influences should be our guide, right? When early on initiating kind of some of these big initiatives, I looked at who's the smartest person in the room, right? Who's the most technically astute? Who's the most process or transaction oriented? Who knows how this really works? And those are the people I was trying to kind of link arms with. But over time, I figured out, hey, I want to link arms with the people that are the most influential. Who's really driving the thoughts behind the scenes and the actions behind the curtain, if you will. So looking for the most influential person in the room became my objective. And this kind of leads to this idea of a coalition versus just kind of this classic, hey, one-way street. I need you to do this for me, and I need you to deliver on this initiative because it's what you're committed to and what you said you're going to do. I don't know that I need to help you too much. The idea with a real coalesced set of stakeholders and enabling stakeholders is a two-way street, and that you're going to need some help from them too to get there. Like, when Dan mentioned the O2C example, right, is going to the front end and dealing with the commercial teams and the sales reps out there. There's going to be, to make these things truly work from an end-to-end perspective, it's going to have to be a coalition building exercise. And now we kind of move to a little bit to the what. I think this is really important, especially as you're driving understanding and building stakeholder groups. It's important to define what we're really trying to do here, right? Define the scope. Is it truly order to cash, right? And so some of these initiatives and some of the initiatives you're working on may be true kind of end to end, or is it really kind of invoice to pay, right? Or billing to cash app? Defining that scope and what we're trying to solve is really important for understanding. And also, I mean, the key thing there is make sure you're engaging the right stakeholders, right? Because if on the order to cash example Dan gave, if it really is just, hey, I'm trying to fix my bill to cash app, then you may need less involvement on the front end. But if you're talking about, I really want to do a true order to cash, then I need to get involved on the front end, and I need to engage a lot of people to help me understand what their problems are, so that I can have some enabled, active stakeholders that are allowing me to solve the problems and move on with making sure we understand what journeys we're gonna address, and setting the expectations clearly up front of what are we really going to get done here and what's our true objective. So I think the understanding that what is critical. And then we talk about the how. I mean, this triangle classic. I mean, obviously, people, process, technology, data is all involved. But one thing we tend to go for as far as an initial look is the technology landscape that's in place. And this is a great example. A little bit hard to see possibly, right? But the point here is and this is an actual technology landscape that we worked with in source to pay, is that there's a lot of inputs. There's a lot of opportunities out there. There's a lot of different things that are in use and that are potentials. And as you kind of explore the marketplace, looking at just laying technology on top of a process that is not efficient is this classic Bill Gates quote, right? Is it's going to magnify that inefficiency. And conversely, if it's an efficient process that's well understood, well scoped, and simplified to the degree it can be, then the technology will do nothing but magnify that efficiency. And as we chatted, earlier around understanding the scope, the process, the many journeys, and how are we going to address those? Where does data fit, right? And it's not just data at the beginning of the process, right? There's a monitoring I'll say kind of a monitoring slash enforcement mechanisms out there to help guide throughout the process and the journey, right? As things are moving forward, to understand, are we really getting the intended outcomes of the effort and the initiative? And then, finally, we'll chat a little bit more about this in a second, but this is not just an intellectual subject matter expertise kind of exercise. To do it right, it never can be. It's got to be, the classic hearts and minds, EQ, IQ. Let's do the best we can to meet people where they are, and then take them with us right on the journey. So, those are just a few key components of the how. Then we talk about the when, this top left, right? Where we all, and you probably every one of you on this call right now probably has some level of involvement in a longer term kind of multi-year, definitely multi-quarter initiative that's set to deliver some significant, either savings or revenue benefit. But what we found in talking to a number of our clients, and my experience has been, you got to be involved in those. You got to know where things are going long term. But there's also these kind of Pareto projects, this kind of 80% of the value for 20% or less of the effort, that continue to deliver that kind of monthly, quarterly, incremental value, and that those things also are really influential and positive in informing what the longer term strategy and initiatives are, and really shaping that. And that the way you do this, right, whether you have a 1, 2, 3 year kind of strategy or roadmap out there, those things are important as kind of guardrails and guides, and really kind of if you think of it's a unifying roadmap, right, that kind of gets people the same vision and the view of what's coming. But to build into those roadmaps are this, I had this idea that I leveraged a lot of these 100-day plans, or whether it's 100-day plans, you think of as quarterly plans. It's items that are much more right in front of us, that really are focused on delivering value first and foremost, whether it's P&L or revenue value, but also a lot of these things could be focused on delivering process efficiency that really drive to whatever our 1, 2, 3 year strategy is, and what ultimately the long-term initiatives can look like, and how those would change over time. And then finally here, Dan did a good job of kind of introducing the human element and talking a little bit about that. But this is I love this trust equation at the bottom, right? The main thing here is understanding where people are coming from, what their perspective is. Somebody in the sourcing organization may not care so much about what happens on the payment process, but I think it's a combination of education and understanding, and again, meeting people where they are. And this trust equation at the bottom is really focused on, hey, let's go out and deliver something. Let's listen. Let's use the 2 ears more than we use the one mouth, right? Let's listen to our stakeholders. Let's understand what's important to them. And then if we're really focused on the right things and driving credibility and accountability and delivering on what we say we're going to deliver, we're going to have an engaged set of stakeholders that are not just helping us in driving things and participating, but they can become the voice for us and help us deliver the message, and be kind of be the marketing for what we want to do now and what we want to do next. So I think, Dan, I'll turn it back over to you, but those are some of the in 10 12 minutes here, some of the key learnings that I've had over the last large number of years.
Thanks, Steve. That's great. It's really interesting on this human element piece. It always seems like a cruel irony that the more we digitize, the more we're dependent on human behavior, certainly in process operations, than perhaps we thought would be. And with the advent of AI, which are augmentation technologies, we're going to be even more dependent on human behavior. So the human element becomes more important or less. It's crazy. But still, thank you so much, Steve. I'm going to have a few thoughts of the road on this now. So we've talked through those three horror stories, which some of those experiences will be very, very close to your hearts, I'm sure. And Steve's 6 root causes are really, really central here. Now, the key point is, in every one of these, every time you've been through something that didn't work out quite well, quite as you expected, there's an aha moment that comes, right? I think I know what's going on. The problem is the aha moment comes far too late. So our job is to get the aha moment as early as possible so we can change course. And I think that's a really, really important lesson, and some of the tactics, I think, play to that. And of course, we do have the everlasting appeal of shiny new objects, and it kind of gets in the way of it sometimes. Sometimes we lead with the new thing rather than lead with the why. But there's a really, really interesting story by Rory Sutherland. It's a metaphor, really. And I think each of the three case studies earlier play to this. And he tells his story about the doorman, and he calls it the doorman fallacy. So you go to a fancy hotel or a fancy apartment block, and there's somebody there that opens the door for you. And it's easy to assume, well, I could save a load of money. I could automate that door opening device. It's easy to do. Just either press a button, or they could be a sensor to, as you walk up, could open the door for you. But you realize that opening the door, once you give it some real thought, maybe in the examples we've had, maybe after we've replaced the doorman with the electronic door opener, we realized that opening the door was only the nominal job of the doorman. But in reality, what they did is to welcome guests. They provided directions, they provided support, they were a kind of level of security on the building, they discouraged vagrants, and actually for hotels and apartment blocks, they could add value and price to the hotel rooms or the apartment fees. So it's far more than opening the door. So I think when we think about that, it's really useful to think about that for everything we're involved in. Just say, are we sure we're asking the right question? Do we really understand what's going on here? And the other piece we talk a lot about is this thing about simplicity. Simplicity is something that needs engineering. The irony is simplicity is very hard to achieve. So this idea that if we're going to try and make a process that's simple and frictionless for our customers and stakeholders, we need to really apply our thoughts to that. And come back to the kind of theme we discussed already, really, these are all human problems. It is the IQ, EQ discussion that Steve talked about. And it's a human problem despite, or perhaps because of, the march of technology, as I already indicated. And I think one of the ways, one of these strategies is about making sure we have got a bias for action. We're not just thinking about how this could work, but we're really taking assertive action on short cycles along those Pareto principles that Steve talked about. So this bias for action is absolutely central to achieving success and to overcoming some of those root cause issues, because it allows us to identify, get to the aha moments earlier. So, we know whether it's in the work we do in enterprise processes, finance processes, manufacturing processes, sourcing and procurement processes, whatever, or in this case, whether you're happening in the field of medicine and surgery, we always have this cognitive bias. We think there's an easy fix, the one simple change that will solve a problem at a stroke, but it doesn't work that way. Whatever we use, whatever tools we use, success requires making 100 small steps go right. So with that, I would like us to kind of reframe Steve's six root causes and strategies for success. I definitely would encourage you to have this in every kind of planning discussion. Do we really understand the why? Do we really understand the who, the what, the how, the when, and the human element, as we've discussed? Right. Do keep asking your questions. This is what we've covered up. We're going to look at one of your questions, or one or two of them now. Let's see what we got here. So, right. First question is, okay, that was quick. How do you suggest these 6 strategies are used in practice? Right, yeah. Those are the 6 strategies. Yeah, see.
Yeah. So just a few things. One thing I would strongly suggest, and this again my learning over years, is before you're talking about a technology, a service provider, an ROI, a business case, right? Is before you even get to those questions and that kind of analysis, is what are we trying to solve for, right? Why are we doing this? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? Who is going to benefit from this, right? Who do we need to engage? And then, I think a third thing around this in the early stages is, what are we proposing or thinking is going to change about the business by doing this, right? So if you're doing that at the front end, I think you're really getting to the core of the issue and understanding what really needs to change. Then I think as you go through it, right, and then you get to the point, hey, we got some support here, and it makes sense to go do this, and this is what we want to do. Then I think you get into how are we going to do it, right? Is there tools we have in place? Is there new technology we need to go kind of scan the marketplace for? And how are we going to make that change? And then what's, ultimately, then you get to the point, okay, we get some of that detail and insight. Then it's, let's go develop an ROI and a business case and go have those discussions. And I think the final thing around this would be, and Dan's mentioned it again here too, is, what are we looking at from a human behavioral perspective? What's going to change? What do we need to change? What do we need to garner support around to change for? And then finally, I think there's got to be, not just, after, but during the process and the change that's going on in the project that's being deployed and executed on is, what you got to do a honest post-mortem, right? What worked well, what didn't work well. Make sure you're using kind of common language, common templates on that. And I think that's a great way to implement these kind of strategies and use them in practice in real life.
Thanks, Steve. That's great. I think this, a lot of people have this concept of an after-action review, like a post-implementation review, which is, and these questions should definitely be part of that. But also think of a before-action review before you even start. As Steve says, before you start building, the business case and the plan, ask these 6 questions really hard and repeatedly of yourselves and your stakeholders. Well, thank you for that. You've got a few other questions. We'll respond to those others by email. We said we keep it to 30 minutes. It's 31 minutes, so conscious of your time. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you found it thought-provoking. See you next time. Thanks very much.